we all are. We can be judgmental and all those kind of things. And so I was kind of exasperated. And so I kind of looked up at the sky and I was like, okay, how can I have like unconditional compassion for people? How can I understand people and why they do the things that they do? And I swear to you, within a week, I discovered astrology as you see it now.
Welcome, Brad. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So how are things in Nashville right now?
Very chilly. I went out on a run this morning and it was about 35 degrees.
Ooh, yeah,
we're considered in the South, but for some reason today in April the 21st, it's freezing out.
Yeah. When does it start warming up there?
I mean, it was like 70-something degrees 2 days ago. So it's just one of those fluke, like winter's got to get one last stand in before it gets into where it's unbearably hot. So
yeah,
it was nice to get a run in the cold, but it's definitely, I'm ready for the warmer weather.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm so excited to talk to you about all of the things. I want to just ask you before we get started, what is your sun, moon, and rising?
All right, I'm a Virgo with a Cancer moon and a Gemini rising.
Awesome. And something that I love that I just discovered like minutes before we hopped on here is that on your website, which listeners can go to learn more, Brad Williams Astrology, you include your entire birth chart there.
I do. Yep.
Yeah.
There's no hiding around that. So if you have to read it, you can see all my potentialities for sure.
Yeah, I love that.
Right.
Yeah. What are some things that, kind of stand out in your chart for you?
Oh, wow. I've never been asked that before. Usually I'm talking about everybody else's chart. So I'm going to be a little, self-conscious here talking about mine. There's a couple of things. So as you know, I'm an astrologer, and so it's an astrologer's chart for sure. My midhaven is ruled by Aquarius. And also I have a Mercury conjunct Pluto, which Mercury is the mind and communication, and it's in Libra. So there's a kind of a balancing act around relationships and interpersonal relationships and people and enjoying people. And but when it's tied into Pluto in that way, there's a lot of depth to that thinking. There's a lot of going underneath the hood of the car to see how it works. And going back to my childhood, that was a very prominent thing that I never really consciously knew about until I got older and was able to go, oh yeah, I remember that. Like, why was I doing that? And so, but yeah, that kind of ties in. And then I have a Jupiter and South Node in the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of Pisces. It's mysticism. And so my South Node being there, there's, karmic ties to the past. And then with Chiron also being there in the 12th house, that's also where my wounds are coming from a previous incarnation. Maybe to a certain degree, I lost myself, an illusionary loss of self in a spiritual practice, maybe a little bit similar to what we were talking about in your karmic story, and so coming into this lifetime to rectify it a little bit, to come back down to earth. And I was told by a mentor of mine around 2008. Her name is Michelle Luson, and she's probably close to 90 now. But she did a reading for me, and she said that I came into this lifetime. My hands are deformed, and I'm missing a right foot. And she said that I came into this lifetime with that to learn sensitivity, because in a previous incarnation I had learned all kinds of different things and mystical practices, but I didn't share it. And so whether or not that's true or not, I don't know, but it made a lot of sense, because in this lifetime, it's been a whole lot of different trials and tribulations, starting from when I was born, coming out the womb different, to many different things that have happened that have allowed me to relate empathetically to so many of my clients and what they've been through. Because again, we can have sympathy for people, we can give that, but to empathy you have for somebody and that feeling around it. And so while my life has always been this this up and down kind of thing. I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world, because it has definitely made my practice more sincere with connecting with people and all of that. And it shows up there in the house of loss, which is the 12th house and the mystic. But I don't believe it's the house of loss. I just think it's where things go you can't see with the physical eyes, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so interesting. And I do want to talk about the 12th house a little bit more with you, but I love that and your ability to connect with people on a deep, deep level. And it sounds like, you know, you really came into this lifetime with a sole purpose to share your gifts. And so I'm curious for you, was there like a Saturn return where you're doing something different and you're like, no, I gotta get into astrology? Like, how did you get into what you're doing now in the world?
Oh gosh, this is a long story. Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay, so just imagine Brad growing up with some pretty darker elements, and so I love my mom, and if she hears this, you know, I do love you, Mom, and everything's worked out great and wonderful now. But the first 6 years of my life were pretty turbulent, in which my mom was married 3 times. The second one abused her really, really bad. I just remember never coming out of my room. I have these memories as a 3-4-year-old where, you know, those things were going on. I'd use the bathroom in my pants. It sounds pretty horrific, but again, it was part of the process of certain things that have happened. And so my life was, I mean, gosh, the book that I'm going to write one day that talks about all this stuff is going to be pretty interesting for people to kind of relate to and to see. Like, my optimism has never waned, even though all of these types of things happen. And that was just before I was 6. And so I didn't see my biological dad for 10 years, between 5 and 16, and like all these different things. And so, but anyway, I want to go down these 2 darker roads. But I also want to say that during that time frame, I had the greatest gift that anybody could ever have, and that was my grandparents. And my grandparents, it's who gave me my conscience. You know, they were married for 65 years until my grandfather passed away, and like all these kind of different things. And like, you know, growing up in this environment, and my grandmother being a householder, but she was the ruler of the roost. And like, you walked into the room and her chair was sitting there, and it was a throne, you know, like it was her throne. And guess what? She was a Leo. So so there's grandma, and then there's my Piscean grandfather, who is the essence of, you know, divine masculinity. Because again, there's the Piscean side of it. And it's interesting because I saw him towards the end of his life, and when he retired, you know, he was kind of the ruler of the outside, but when he came in, grandma was the ruler of the inside. And so I kind of got this really neat kind of interesting look at the interplay of people that were madly in love, but we're sharing more traditional roles, but more in an empowered sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a beautiful thing. And so I had that going on with all these kind of darker things. So anyway, that didn't mean that I didn't get in a whole lot of trouble growing up. So I was always doing something. And so, you know, and in my defense, I probably had an excuse, but I would never use that excuse to have continued to get into trouble. And so let's fast forward through some other darker moments that I'm not even going to talk about right now in this presentation. But the thing is that I eventually get kicked out of college. Let's just say that. It was, let's see, I got caught smoking pot in the dorm room twice. And the other time I was just in a room with somebody that had some mushrooms, and I had nothing to do with that, but that was 3 strikes, you're out. And plus my grades were terrible. And, so, and I was never really good in school, pretty bad. And it wasn't because of IQ, it was just because I'm just not interested. I was interested in like fitting in and all kinds of other things. And so here I am, I'm 21 years old, and I have no direction. I've been kicked out. I'm back living with my grandparents, and this is the second Saturn Square that's going on at this point. We can talk more about Saturn later.
Yeah.
But the astrology that's happening around that time. And so here I am, just needing some sort of direction. And so I had an uncle that scooped me up. He was working in computers, and so he brought me into that. But then we started going to church. Okay. And so I'd kind of grown up, Jesus is my homeboy, that kind of thing. And, you know, sometimes vacation Bible school and like all of these different kind of things, but we were never committed to going to church every Sunday. It wasn't that type of family. But again, that's what it was. Bible in the house, like we believed in Jesus and that kind of thing. And so going to church, and it was a Catholic church, which I had never been to before. It was all kinds of, you know, oh, wow, this is great. You know, I'm getting my spiritual stuff going on, you know, like I'm starting to feel good about myself, and, you know, doing this computer training. And so I'm doing all of that. And I'm like, I'm starting to read the Bible and all this kind of thing. And so then I get a job in Nashville because of my dear friend at the time, Steve Agee. His parents took me in Nashville. And this is 1997.
Okay.
So 1997, I turned 22, come to live in Nashville, get the job, and I'm going to church. And I'm going to church, and it's called Barry's Chapel Church of Christ. And so I am going to church on Wednesdays. I'm going to church on Sunday morning. I'm going to church on Sunday evening, and I'm reading the Bible heavily. And so one of the things that I started to notice, and a little bit of backstory too. So I'm from Virginia Beach. Okay.
Right.
Virginia Beach is the home of the Association for Research and Enlightenment. It is the home of Edgar Cayce. Okay. So I've heard you talk about Akashic Records. Edgar Cayce just pops into my head.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, my mom always believed in psychics. I mean, I remember her having tapes and things with psychics that she would see. And so anyway, so I'm reading the Bible heavily. And so I go and see my preacher, and his name was Jerry Barber, and amazing, amazing man. And I'm like, Jerry, as you should do. I was like, oh, preach, oh man, oh, tell me, that kind of. So I was like, go to see Jerry. And I said, Jerry, can you show me in the Bible where it says the prophets stopped? Because there was all these prophets making these predictions and all these different things, and the Magi and all these different things. And so, can you show me in the Bible where the prophets stopped? Because I want to know this. Because I know who Edgar Cayce is, and Edgar Cayce was a very deeply spiritual, religious man too, and taught Sunday school and all that kind of stuff. And so he gives me this beautiful answer, which I do not remember. But what he did say after that I'll always remember, he said, there are 3 words that can never get you in trouble. And it is, I don't know. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So here I am, really curious. And so one of the things that started standing out to me is that I was reading the NIV version of the Bible at work. I would work in the evenings doing a help desk for computers. Mm-hmm. And then at home or at church, I was reading the King James version. And so I started noticing some words that were very, very different in the NIV version from the King James version. And I'm being told that the NIV makes it easier to read. And I'm like, well, this is changing the meaning. Mm. So in 1 Corinthians 2, it talks about a secret wisdom giving to those who are perfect in the King James version. And in the NIV, it said to those who are mature. And I was like, perfect and mature are 2 different things. I mean, I can see they're cousins maybe, but so that was one thing. And then there was another verse, and I can't think of what it is right now, but it says, make thine eye be single. Okay. So in the King James version, it was I singular. And in the NIV, it said eyes, plural. Mm. And so there was a couple of little things right there that kind of triggered this kind of thing about question, what is this all about? And so when it all coincided with I don't know. And so shortly after that, I discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm like, why didn't these get put in the Bible? What's up with that? Who decided that? And this is right before the Da Vinci Code came out. And that would have been a whole lot more helpful for what happened after next. And again, the internet's not like it is today, with all these different things. And so I just go on this mad research kind of deal. And so in my mad research, it stems out of the secret book of Thomas that came from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I started reading Thomas means twin in Hebrew. And I also read it somewhere in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I could be wrong on this because I'm telling a story from 23 years ago. But the thing is that there's stories about Jesus throwing a rock and killing a bird, and then maybe bringing it back to life or something like that. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's in my head. Is I was like, oh wow, so he wasn't perfect. So the whole time that the whole thing taken out of the Bible, that was the whole he did all these things, and then he's gone for 30 years, that kind of thing. And so while he was gone, a lot of the stuff that I remember out of the Dead Sea Scrolls was presented in that way. And I was like, okay, so he kind of grew. And so all this confusion. And so then I was like, okay, well, where did the Bible come from? And I was like, okay, so I started studying that. And so again, I'm not going to go through all the details of that, but what I found out was there was this warring Roman general, Constantine, that had a vision, 4th century AD. Again, if my time frames are wrong, I'm sorry. I haven't told the story in forever, so I'm trying to piece it all together as I go along. And so anyway, I find out that this warring Roman general decides or has this vision of Jesus coming to him or a dream or something like that. And he says, conquer this land in thy name. And so he wakes up the next day or whatever, and then has all his soldiers paint crosses on their swords, and they go out and win this battle for this bridge, which I guess controls Rome or whatever it is. And so anyway, from that point forward, he calls these councils together. I think one of the councils was the Council of Nicaea and others. Again, there's other experts out there that can tell the story more accurately than I can. I'm just telling you where I was way back then. And so anyway, I'm like, oh, wow. So a warring Roman general is the founder of modern day Christianity. That sounds off to me, which from that point forward, it sort of gave me this permission to start looking into other different spiritualities and different forms of religions and that kind of stuff. And so
interesting.
So I break out, I start looking at different religions, and I remember reading the Celestine Prophecy. The Celestine Prophecy had just come out around that time, James Redfield.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of interesting because I was like, oh yeah, I kind of can see auras sometimes off of trees or something, or I'm just hallucinating from smoking too much weed or something. I don't know. But anyway.
As you say this, you have this beautiful light that's surrounding you right now. I've been noticing it since the beginning we started talking. Go on. Yeah.
So anyway, I start studying all these different religions and going from, Tibetan Buddhism to Hinduism to Sikhism to, a little bit of, I just wanted to know. I was just trying to absorb this kind of stuff. And at the same time, my best friend David was going through his own stuff. So he was a great sounding board to kind of gather information from, or like to, have little contrarian type of arguments with, and like that kind of thing. Because I was a little bit more stubborn to break out of sort of the rigid beliefs that I had started to create around myself that year coming out of college, because it was working for me in that kind of way.
Yeah. But anyway, I have to interrupt you really quick to ask a question. So as you're telling this, I'm like kind of looking at your chart. Would this, tie in, you have Uranus in the 6th house in Scorpio. And I feel like it's this like depth of exploring and, wanting to see the truth and, kind of wake people up to higher levels of consciousness and maybe go outside of the box a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And again, it's interesting too, because we're leaving, our south node to get to our north node, and my north node is also in that 6th house in Scorpio. And so
yeah,
it's really interesting to hear that question and to think about where I was at the time, and that maybe some of the things that I was doing was actually some of the things I needed to let go of later on with that south node and Taurus, trying to figure out control mechanisms around my life.
Yeah.
And so, because again, your early 20s, I mean, really from birth to 29 and a half years old is really about you creating coping mechanisms.
Safety, stability, grounding. Yeah.
While I was planting the seeds for now, it was a lot of other trials and tribulations that came after that really sort of kicked out a lot of the fear of abandonment, like all the, thinking that I had to be loved for my utility, that kind of stuff that I've had to deal with in this life. And so, but yeah, I mean, again, building the building blocks towards the astrology is a really interesting story. But what was in the undercurrent of that was a lot of me figuring out how to cope put myself inside of a box of some sort of spiritual truth, but it was a box that I was never able really truly to find. And so, but that's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And it's fascinating, right? Because we're going to get into this in a minute, but you have such a unique way of practicing astrology. And I've had the honor of having a reading from you, and you really are combining, different modalities in a way that I've never personally seen before, but really this, natal chart reading with Akashic records, story, combining that together to like really share with people their soul's path and what they came into this life to overcome or, discover and deepen, right?
No, totally. And that actually didn't come in until around 2008. So, so it's like basically I had, so I'm almost, let me finish the story on, because I'm almost there and I'm about to bring it home with what happened. And so as I'm studying all these different religions and everything, I'm reading the book, The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama.
Great book.
And this is in 1998, late 1998. And I get to a quote. I've never even finished that book to this day. I was joking about it not too long ago. And I got to a quote and it said, compassion is the key to your own happiness. And I was like, damn, I'm a judgmental a-hole. I mean, I'm not really, but like, but we all are. We can be judgmental and all those kind of things. And so I was kind of exasperated. And so I kind of looked up at the sky and I was like, okay, how can I have like unconditional compassion for people? How can I understand people and why they do the things that they do? And I swear to you, within a week, I discovered astrology as you see it now. Not
wow.
And that helps me understand why we do the dumb stuff that we do. And it's created such a compassionate angle to really truly understand so many different aspects of life and more of it kind of keeps me in a sort of the center of the yin yang, very centrist in this. Like, what are we doing as far as so many things that come out of ourselves? And, sometimes somebody has to be awful to us. Sometimes we have to be awful to them. And out of these types of dilemmas, we find ourselves, are we able to forgive? Or are we able to be forgiven? All these kind of different things. And these are just some of the pieces of the puzzle when it comes to what our human existence is, and this, trying to make it into a spiritual world and that kind of thing too. So, but yeah, that's how I got into astrology initially. And,
yeah.
And that was the reason why, just because I wanted to be able to have compassion. And again, do I have complete compassion now? No, I'm human. But at the same time, as I've evolved, like, it's just so much more organic to come to a space. But what I've also learned about compassion is that you have to have compassion with wisdom. And that wisdom comes with being compassionate to yourself. Because a lot of times what I was doing was thinking I was being compassionate, but I was being a martyr, giving up too much of myself towards somebody else in order to not inflame to cause a ripple in something or whatever. And so one of the things that I have really worked hard to develop over the last 3 years is, truth over peace, that kind of thing. And that, what is more important, and that kind of thing, because a lot of times is that when we don't tell the truth to keep the peace turns into a war later because you never told the truth. And so if you have to have a small battle in the short term to make the long term more efficient, then yeah, truth is always the way to go. And you have to have a lot of courage to say the truth, and that kind of thing. And so that's what I've been working on over the last 3 years is speaking the truth of what I truly feel about things, and not, not feeling like I'm going to let people down or make them disappointed in me or make them, think otherworldly. So
yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, with giving readings, you really are giving an honest, interpretation of what you see and feel. And I'm so curious to ask you, are there certain themes that you see that pop out in somebody's birth chart? And, I know you've looked at, thousands of charts. And so when you're looking at somebody's chart, are you saying, oh, wow, this person is really dealing with these distinct curriculum of lessons in this lifetime?
Yeah, the charts usually have a pretty pronounced theme. And so I learned a technique back in 2008, 2009, by Stephen Forrest. And Stephen, he basically, I'm going to use a little bit of jargon here, and I don't want to get too technical about this because I am far from the most technical astrologer. There's a lot of astrologers that have just been studying for a year could run circles around me, but that's because I've just simplified it so much over the years that I've just taken out the things that I don't intuitively,
resonate as much. Yeah.
And on a side note, for anybody that wants to study astrology, please do that. Do not overwhelm yourself with all the technical stuff. And we can talk about that more later if you want to. But the thing is that I take the South Node, I take the South Node house, I take the South Node ruler and the South Node ruler's house, and then all the aspects that the South Node makes and the South Node ruler makes. And then that's how the karmic story is created. So from there, there's a theme. Now, a lot of astrologers, they will look at maybe the rising sign to find the chart ruler and all that. I don't do that. And that doesn't mean that what they're doing is wrong or what I'm doing is right. It just means that for me to get inside the chart, nodes of the moon are where it's at for me. And then
Yeah.
from there, I'll start breaking down. Sometimes I won't even know a person's sun sign until like I get on the phone with them. I'm like, oh yeah, your sun. But because I'm so, looking at the core of what their destinational purpose is in this life. And if their sun doesn't have a big influence in on going towards the North Node ruler and all that kind of thing, then it's not something that I want to focus on concretely in the first reading. Now, the subsequent readings, that's a whole other story. But in the Karmic Story reading with me, it's so yes, there are themes that come out all the time. What's interesting is that sometimes those themes can have cross purposes. Sometimes you can be coming where you're going and going where you're coming, and you got to redo things. So I have a client that she has a 10th house emphasis. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then she also has a first house, or she has a first house, and this is her south node and her south node ruler. So the south node is in the first house, the south node ruler is in the 10th house. And so what happens is with this particular person is that she also has her sun, Jupiter, it's a loaded 10th house. So you might think because the south node ruler is coming out of that 10th house that she's going to no longer be working on that 10th house stuff. She's going towards the 4th house. And the 4th house is about feelings and family and your deep psychiatry and all that kind of stuff. And so, but no, because she has all of those planets there, she has to take the wounds that were created from that past life and redo them in a more aligned sense of purpose with feeling, because in a previous incarnation, she took away the feeling. She took away the empathy to work on the more public side of her mission, which is the 10th house.
Now, when you're looking at a chart, for those who maybe aren't as familiar, the 10th house represents career and maybe fame. When you're seeing a lot of energy there, a lot of planets in the 10th house, are you typically finding somebody who, has a very public persona?
Well, yes. Now, there are exceptions to all the rules in astrology, always. And it takes a totality of, is that a word? It takes a total of the whole chart to really get to the gist of it. But there is a rule of thumb. So if I'm looking at somebody that has a public face, maybe somebody that's famous or whatever, more often than not, they're going to have a 10th house or a 5th house or both emphasis. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you can look at so many different charts, you're going to see a lot of that, but some don't. And so maybe somebody has a sun conjunct Jupiter or something like that, or some other elements that in there that will show that. But for the most part, what the 10th house represents is that your mission in life is to do something, or for people that have no idea who you are. So basically, Emily, your North Node is in the 10th house. So you're going out into the 10th house. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do with this podcast. And really you're getting perfect strangers seeing what your mission is. So this is exactly what you're supposed to do. And it's in Gemini. So you're talking and like all these different things. And so it makes it perfect in that light. And here's the thing too, is that, your Chiron is there. And so Chiron represents the wounds in astrology.
Yeah.
So you have deep wounds when it comes to putting yourself out there. But just like Chiron in mythology, Chiron couldn't heal others, but it could heal it couldn't heal himself, but it could heal others. And so whenever we find Chiron in the chart, that's how you heal yourself, by helping others heal. And so by you putting your wounds out there in a more public fashion and not being afraid to do it, or being afraid but having the courage to do that, then naturally your 10th house mission is very much being ignited and being pulled through in a very positive way, for sure.
That resonates so deeply. I love hearing your interpretation of that. And just, since we are talking about my chart, I'd love to see, like, from your perspective, when you're looking at it holistically, what are some of the areas of like potential expansion and growth, and like the areas of challenge?
Well, the areas of challenge are really some of your strengths. So that Sun Venus conjunction that you have in the 12th house, and it's, conjunct the ascendant. So on one hand, if so let me start over. All right, for one, a Sun Venus conjunction that tight is a very beautiful thing to have in a birth chart. Okay, so let's acknowledge that is absolutely, you could be socially unattractive, but you're still attractive. Like there is this, and you're a very beautiful person. And so there's this beautifulness, there's this this softness. There's this sense of attractiveness that you give out to the world that you won't even realize sometimes that you have. And it's in Virgo, so it keeps you humble. So there, you know, and again, like the shadow side of Virgo is being nitpicky and like being critical and all that, because, you know, I'm a Virgo myself too.
Yeah.
So there's this sense of in Virgo energy of, you know, seeking perfection, because, you know, Virgo is the virgin in a purity sense, but in that purity sense, it's, you know, a synonym of perfection. And so we're always seeking perfection. And so not only within your solar, your ego, which is the sun, and then also the Venetian way that you connect with people, like how do you love and how do you want to be loved through that Venetian lens is and also in Virgo. And so that's a beautiful element to have, but let's stick it into the 12th house. It's not of this world. And so it's a superpower in a sense through your psychic sensitivity. It really is. But what happens is, you know, you're younger and you pivot and you make a different direction, and all of a sudden, instead of seeking ways to align yourself through spirit, through some sort of, you know, spiritual practice, meditation, yoga, you know, whatever, surfing, you know, whatever it is. I mean, there's like so many different ways that we can express ourselves spiritually. Our creative form of self-expression is one of those. It's not always having to sit and meditate. I've met some of the most beautiful spiritual people in the world that just surf, you know, like they live. And so with that Sun Venus being in the 12th house, there can be at times a little bit of an illusionary loss of self because of that, because you lose the substance of your groundedness from that Virgo perspective. And so that can mean that sometimes you might end up, you know, accidentally merging with another, you know, not even realizing it, because you're so tuned in through this beautiful solar Venetian energy that combines together through this ethereal filter. And so that's one of your greatest gifts, in a sense, that you're able to psychically go into. Like I would say that you're, you know, not that we're comparison or hierarchical kind of thing, but like I would look at your chart and say that more than likely you're way more intuitive than I am, you know. And again, not that I'm like this most intuitive person, but I got to give credit where credit is due when I see a Venus conjunct the sun so tightly in the 12th house.
Well, you know, I'm gonna share, because that hits so strongly, and sometimes it's something that I don't recognize, like you mentioned. And a good example of this is I had a podcast interview earlier today, and you know, there's a lot of earth in my chart, so I'm pretty grounded, like I'm pretty down to earth, and just getting ready for this interview, I was like floaty and could not concentrate. I was just like had a million thoughts going on in my mind, and you know, I connected with her, and she's, you know, beautiful. And it was a great conversation, but I asked her right off the bat, you know, like what her chart was like. And she's like, I'm all air, no, no earth in my chart. And sometimes it's just, I'll pick up on people's energy, but I'm not even realizing it.
Yeah, and then you tie in that Pisces moon of yours, and then, you know, that makes it even more of an ethereal thing. And again, that goes back to the relatability of it being in the 7th house, you know, intimate partnerships, you know, not just romantic ones, but just deep bonds. And so again, Pisces moon, you know, Pisces is my favorite sign. And maybe it's because it's opposite Virgo and I'm looking at it in a projective sense, but really the Piscean idea around the energy of that is, you know, it is not of this earth. It is the ending. It is the finality. It is the 12th house. It is, you know, Pisces and Neptune. And in that watery space, we do find the God goddess. You know, like we do find the merging back in with the infinite. We do find enlightenment. And so you have this moon that's there, and then you tie that in with that 12th house Sun Venus. And Emily, I mean, it is fascinating to me that your self-doubt, well, it's not fascinating because you're a Virgo, we have a self-doubt, is holding you back to a certain degree in you being somebody that I would be asking Jerry Barber about 23 years ago. When did the prophets stop? They haven't. And so, Emily, you are a prophet, you know? You are somebody that has the ability, reaching towards that north node, to prophesize, to see things before they happen, to understand them from a more cosmic spiritual sense. You know, one of the things that you might have a problem with is that maybe tying in maybe some of the potential doom and gloom that some of your visions might have into the meaning of that, you know. And so understanding from from a foundational perspective is that there's no such thing as death, and there's not. So what do we really truly have to fear, you know?
Yeah, something that I want to ask you about with that, and I think it really ties into a past life in that Sagittarian energy, is about maybe in a previous lifetime speaking my truth, or you know, sharing knowledge in a way that was like more authoritarian, or like I knew, because I feel like in this lifetime it's like I do not want to do that, and there's such a resistance, and I think the self-doubt really helps with not being able to do that. But it's almost like I will not. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because for me, Sagittarius in the fourth house is somebody that is hiding behind their beliefs. Okay, that's the karmic story kind of past life. You were in Tibet, I believe. I need to.
Yeah, and that's my South Node is in the
right.
fourth house. Yeah.
In Sagittarius, and so I think I had you in Tibet. You were during the 5th Dalai Lama, sorry, I don't always remember the karmic stories. I just know the karma, and I believe that you they thought you were a miracle baby because then your family, yeah. So there was a tie into that with the family in the fourth house, but namely, I don't see much ego here. It's more ego-less because it's conjunct that Neptune. Okay, so it's interesting because, you know, you developed a compelling belief system that you hid behind, but that's not necessarily something of an authoritative type of thing. And you were a teacher, you went around and taught things, but it was mainly around what you had been taught around the other, you know. So really the thing about it is that I don't see it as an ego thing with you. I think it is mainly that because you were told that you were arhat in that previous incarnation, and it turns out that you weren't, that there is maybe this sense of, I don't have the authority to go out and say these things, which you are learning to do because the 10th house is of authority. That's Saturn's house, and Saturn is the authority figure. And so be the authority. You know, you're not going to come across, you're too humble, you're too Virgo to ever come across as some person that thinks they know it all, or, and you know who they are. They're out there, and yes, I'm being judgmental right now, but again, I have compassion for them, what they're learning. You know, but you know that there's a sense of I am the guru, you know, and that kind of thing, and that's what you're most afraid of, is you being accused of being a guru. Yeah. And again, and that's not, and then maybe being accused that you think that you're a guru, which was going to really devastate you, because you know that you're just this person that wants to connect to spirit and redirect that information and energy out into a public forum in a way that is consciously for all people to hear. And you're not taking any kind of credit for that. And like, that's the beauty for that. So, and again, this is what I've had problems with me thinking that I had to be that 10 years ago. There's a whole ego story I could tell you about that I went through in 2008, 2009, 2010, you know, like learning to get the ego out of my practice, you know? And so the point for you is that, no, I don't think that that your ego or you in this lifetime or in a previous lifetime was too authoritative. I think for one thing, you were being told what to do in that lifetime. You know, again, you were very gifted, if I recall, you know, but again, you got pulled into a direction of, you lost your family, and instead of mourning that in a human way, you try to use the rhetoric of spirit to hide behind that, you know, emotions around that. And so, yeah, it's beautiful, but tragic at the same time. So please, Emily, don't ever think that you're coming from an authoritative place. You're not. You're coming to a place where you're learning how to be a little more authoritative, a little more assertive, a little more putting yourself out there in a way that will sound to some people like you're an authority, but you know deep in your heart that you're just saying what you're feeling and trusting that. And if anybody judges you for that, that's their problem. And us Virgos, we have such a hard time with that. Gosh. Oh man.
I know, it's that criticism. I feel like you're seeing my soul so deeply. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask you, I mean, I know you're probably maybe not looking at that at this moment, but is there any indication through like transits or progression that that will become easier for me?
Well, let's see. So I do actually have your transits up right now. So,
awesome. So exciting.
So one thing is Uranus is at 10 degrees Taurus right now. Now it's going to be a few years, but eventually that's going to go into your 10th house. And that's going to be very liberating for you because Uranus is the side of the yin yang that's chaos, where Saturn is order. Okay. And so when Uranus comes in, it decalcifies. So your thoughts around you holding back, which is only giving you a glass ceiling kind of thing where you're at right now, when that Uranus comes in a couple of years and hits that 10th house cusp, you're going to break through that glass ceiling. And several things are going to happen. Number one, it's going to hit that Chiron. Okay. So what Uranus can do in that sense, it can liberate you from those wounds. All right. So liberating yourself from those wounds, it's going to provoke. It's going to do something in that way. And so there's the potentiality around that is endless and how that can be provoked. But at the same time, you're building and have been building your spiritual foundation. So whatever comes up during that time, you know it is right. And one of the things that you can always count on is that everything in astrology was supposed to happen. Okay. So it's never wrong. Now the interpretation can be wrong if somebody is going to be dogmatic about exactly what's going to happen, which, you know, some astrologer might say, oh yeah, Uranus is going to hit your 10th house cusp, you're going to lose your job and all your, no. No, what's going to happen is that if you are doing the thing that you're here to do, which you are, it's going to add more genius to that. It's going to add more creativity to that because it's going to break you free from some of the shackles that have held you back in your creativity. Because again, sometimes you could be self-conscious in the idea that you don't want to be an authoritative person and come across with this big ego and all these different things. And so when that Uranus gets there to that 10th house and then it hits that Uranus, or excuse me, hits that Chiron, oh man, things will start to loosen up in a lot of ways for you. And you'll start to have even deeper visions because the more that you trust it, the more that you use it, the more that you're going to really allow yourself to really unfold in a way that, again, that gets that prophet, that seership, that, you know, that intuitive writer that starts to come out of you in a way that really presents itself to the world in a way that's really compelling, unless making sure you don't step on anybody's toes.
I love that so much. And that is very exciting. And I feel that. And what's interesting is it actually lines up with numerology. I don't know if that's, you know, a practice that you have looked into or ascribed to in any way, but just the numerology of it lines up pretty well to what you're describing. So we'll have to, you know, touch base. And I know that we'll keep in contact. Right. It must be so fun to, you know, have clients where you're able to, you know, see their highest potentials. Cause that's what I feel like it is like we have infinite potentials and we could be just like sitting on the couch eating potato chips, you know, and we don't have to necessarily be doing our charts, but it's great to be able to give people an indicator of what their soul's highest potential is and then see that unfold.
It is. And I have, okay, so, you know, I've been professionally doing this since 2008. So I have clients from way back then. And it's gotten to the point now with certain clients like that is that, you know, like I'm this cheery person, but sometimes I have to give tough love. Because we build this relationship over a 10-year period. It is no, you know, it is a non-filtered Brad Williams astrology. And so, yeah, I have seen and been a part of many different beautiful things and really hard things with different clients over that long period of time. Because, you know, like it's interesting that, you know, even for myself, being way back then, you know, what I was doing and my philosophies and all that kind of thing to see where people are now. And, you know, I have a client that was in a horrific marriage and, you know, and we worked together to get her out of that. And then working through some of the horrific type of things that were going on post-marriage with the ex-husband. And then all of a sudden, like here we are today within this 10-year process, getting into, you know, one of her, she's now a junior partner in a law firm and like kicking ass.
That's
and
so
like,
awesome.
Right.
Wait, I want to ask you really, so can you see when somebody is going to fall like madly in love or, you know? be supported in that? Like,
okay, so there are different signals that show energy that go towards something. Several different things that we have to look at, that we have to look at where we are evolutionary wise when it comes to dating and relationships and love and all that kind of stuff. So that's one way of looking at it. We have to, we sit down and we start, somebody is longing for a partner. Well, if that's the case, there's usually something we have to work on with you to make you okay being with you. Okay, because you're longing for somebody so hard that you keep attracting probably the wrong people, which has created some sort of trust issue, which in turn creates this never-ending cycle of bringing in the wrong people because you're learning how to be self-sufficient with yourself. And so we have to see if that's part of it. But if you're somebody that has very much been working on yourself, you don't have an aversion to dating, you're dating, take it or leave it or all that, you would like to meet and be with somebody in a healthy kind of way, then yeah, we can start to look at, okay, yeah, you got Venus transiting your 5th house. Well, the energy around meeting somebody in that space is going to be heightened. Jupiter transiting your 7th house. Sure, there might be something there, and so there's a lot of different categories there that we can look at potentiality with that. But again, when we're looking at things in astrology, there's several different outcomes that could happen. Venus going to that 5th house might mean that, you're making money through your creative form of self-expression. But then again, to somebody else, it could mean that you're going to be meeting somebody in a kind of a fun kind of way, in a heartfelt kind of way. Because the 5th house is usually where relationships start.
Yeah.
And the 8th house is where they get culminated. You know what I mean? So that, because the 8th house is where the depth comes in. Like, you go through the 7th house and everything is like, ooh, hoo, hoo, and then 8th house is like, here's the truth. It's
intimacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And that true intimacy. And again, that's something that if you can't be truly intimate with yourself, tell yourself the truth, and then do the things that you need to do to find meaning in yourself, then it's very difficult for you to really be able to do that with somebody else.
Wow.
So that's a lot of what we work on within the karmic relationships, patterning around certain people and what they're trying to do and finding love and all those kind of things. So,
oh my gosh, so many questions there. Okay, so first, I don't know if you're in a partnership or a relationship, but I have to ask, if you're dating, would you like immediately look at the person's birth chart?
No. So a couple of things. If this is my own thing, okay? This is not, if other professional astrologers do this, I'm not judging them. It's just been my own thing.
Okay.
So the answer is no. I do not. I avoid looking at their chart. And the reason for that is because they can't do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. So as time goes on, and and maybe we're committed and we're getting closer together and all that, and through osmosis or asking me questions, because again, they'll pull up their chart and they'll ask me different things and I'll tell them where to look, and they'll start to learn different things, and maybe I'll look at it a little bit more. And so yeah, it's a very difficult kind of thing to really to get in there, and maybe I might glance at it or something like that and then just kind of pack it away. But no, I can't do that. Yeah. And it's been one of those things. My previous marriage, it took a few years to where I really would look at her chart. And then so the person that I'm dating now, we had already had a relationship before we started dating. And so I already knew her chart. Which again, maybe I'm unpacking this in my own head right now, or maybe that my stand around that wasn't the right idea, because in this particular version of the charts, I'm going to say some things that other astrologers are going to be like, wow, and I'll try to explain it. But my moon is exactly conjunct her north node exactly conjunct on her 7th house cusp.
Wow.
So we have the 7th house cusp, which is love, relationships, and marriage. So the 4 points, the 1st house, 4th house, 7th house, 10th house, anything that hits that is heightened, just times 10. Okay. Yeah. So her north node is in Cancer on the 7th house cusp. And so my moon is at 4 degrees Cancer. Her 7th house cusp is at 4 degrees Cancer, and her north node is at 4 degrees Cancer. So that's one thing. So then the other thing is her Venus is at 25 degrees Scorpio, and my North Node is at 25 degrees Scorpio. So we have two very powerful elements that show a deeply spiritual bond in that. And there's other things. I'm not going to get too wonky in this, talking about me stuff. But the point being is that that's a very profound type of thing to have an interpersonal.
Yeah.
And so if I have a couple that I'm doing a couple reading for, and they have something like that, and they're going through a Saturn Square, like their first one, they've been together for 7 and 8 years, and there's some tension being formed. I'm going to be like, look, this is a relationship that's worth working on. Now, I never say a relationship is not worth working on. I never say that, ever. But if there is something in there where they're doubting it, and I see stuff like that, then I'm going to be effusive about, hey, look, here's what's going on. This is the potential, and this is one that's worth working on. With others, I will use phrases such as, you're going to have to do work that many people aren't willing to do. So is this person right enough for you to do that work? Because again, there's nothing in astrology that's black and white. And I'm sorry, that could get me in trouble in some circles of astrology, but for me, there's no absolutes, zero. And so with those North Node things that I was talking about in the person's chart that I'm dating, that's potential because it's North Node.
Yeah.
So we have to be actionable in that. Whereas you could meet somebody with South Node elements just like that, which you're supposed to be leaving behind. It's love at first sight. It's like this
familiarity.
Right, familiarity. And then when it's not working 6 months later, and it's like this sense of like this, it's past life, it's real, but it's just not for this lifetime. It doesn't mean that if you have South Node connections that won't be something, but I'm just giving a caricature kind of example of this, is that the beautiful thing about that is that, and understanding it, that, hey, this could be temporary. So get what you need out of it. And then from there, find the path that gets you towards more of the North Node in your life. And again, if it's with that person being at the South Node, then so be it. But it doesn't always mean that when you meet somebody and have this really crazy intimate connection, that it's going to be right and be the end all be all. Because I can tell you right now, honestly, when I first met this person that I'm dating, we felt a connection. It was not romantic at all. Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. And then after some things happened, and later on, earlier this year, things started to unfold in that way. And again, that was
Did you look at the timing of your chart and be like, oh, this is happening?
Yeah, I'm sure I did. I'm sure.
Be honest.
Yeah, I'm sure I did. In hindsight, I was like, man, why did this shift? What was going on? Yeah, and so yeah, it's relationships are a very look, you can't learn trust by yourself, and you can't learn a lot of the things that you refuse to see in yourself by yourself. Mm-hmm. And so relationships are a complicated thing. Just like the charts are complicated, relationships are too. And so I take the relationship patterning very, very, very seriously when it comes to people. And so many of my friends and so many of my clients want to know if this is the one that's going to be it, and like all that kind of stuff. And it's like, the potential's there, sure.
Will you counsel couples when they have a reading and basically say, like, based on your charts, I see you're going to have roadblocks here. These are some of your strengths that as a couple,
yeah.
Totally.
Because, and that's the main thing that I focus on is, okay, so here are the things that have pulled you together. This is what you're attracted to. Oh, you got this Mars trine Venus. Okay. Hey, that's fun. But you got this Saturn Square Moon. Well, okay. To me, that's a lot of loyalty, a ton of loyalty. Okay. Now for me, squares are fine. I don't get all upset about squares or opposition. Squares just show you where the tension is.
Yeah.
Where a trine can make you lazy. A trine can be like, everything's good, so I don't need to work at it. Well, guess what? A square is going to make you work at it. So shouldn't we embrace the squares? It's funny because I'll talk to people. I got so many squares in my chart. Like, no, it's okay. This is good. There's a lot of action going on. Like, let's do this. And so a Saturn Square Moon, and so in that way, there's a sense of loyalty, especially from the Saturn person to the Moon person, already right off the bat. And so that's something that is the Saturn person is always going to be conscious about the moon person. And then the moon person, they might feel the tension might feel that the Saturn person can be a little like, I don't want to say oppressive, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Like just more like restricted, like more disciplined,
that kind of thing. And so when we look at two people that come together like that and they have other things, this right here shows us that, okay, so the moon person probably needs some discipline in their life. They probably, got a whole bunch of, Gemini things in the first house and so there needs to be a little discipline there. And then the Saturn person also needs to not be so rigid.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a Capricornian type and they're always, got to make sure everything's safe before they go and do something, or, a Taurus. And so what I'm going to coach a couple in with that type of aspect is that there's going to have to be some give and take. You're going to have to be more spontaneous, Mr. Saturn person. And you're going to have to take responsibility for sometimes that your emotions might be a little bit off kilter. One of the things that might get me in trouble in some of these types of things is that, we're being taught nowadays that all feelings are valid, but sometimes your feelings are a caricature of a situation, which means that is it really valid to the other person?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you might have created something that based upon some past type of response that you had with somebody else that comes out in this kind of way that you might not be so aware of.
Yeah.
Thus, the Capricorn or the Saturn person is going to be like, well, hold on a second. This is what happened. A, B, C, D. And you, the moon person, might have gone from A to D and skipped all the rest to come up with your, the reasoning around your feeling this way. And so you have to be gentle about that because again, feelings are a very touchy kind of thing, but at the same time, we have to be responsible for our feelings too. It starts with us singularly as an individual first. And so when it comes out through our partnerships, to throw out there, you have to justify my feelings because I'm having it, that kills the conversation. That says that the person isn't seeing things a little bit differently that might can help you with those feelings. Now look, if the Saturn person is condescending and saying F off, that's not what happened, then that's a doomed failed relationship anyways. But yeah, when there's a Saturn square moon type of aspect in there, sometimes the moon person is they're going to be a little bit off. They can be with all their perceptions. And so the best thing for them to do is when they're feeling something in an emotional kind of response, then they should probably go for a walk, or they should probably wait, or at least give a note to their significant other, say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit off. I'm not sure what it is. Let me kind of reevaluate this. Don't take this personally, and then go do your thing. And the person's going to be cool with that because that's a Saturnian way of dealing with it. And so if the moon person goes off and then 24 hours comes back and still feel the same way, then their feelings are valid, 100%. And so that's how you deal with the Saturn square moon. And it's just a singular aspect out of millions that could be had in a relationship.
Yeah, I feel like this is life-changing advice right now. And I think it's a new form of therapy. I mean, it really is to like bring the astrology into it and understand those placements on a deeper level. I mean, I'm sure some partnerships do explore that, but what a revolutionary way to really connect.
Totally it is. And I love love. I have Neptune in the seventh house, and so give me a Matthew McConaughey rom-com, and just I'll watch them all day long. I'm a romantic at heart. I really am, and so I'm excited about when couples come and see me, or we connect through astrology and working on how to rectify it. But I always give the best advice that I can give on how to save marriages. I've never once looked at something and said, this cannot be survivable, even though intuitively I might have felt like it wasn't going to.
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad you brought that up because, I have a friend of mine who was saying like, oh, I saw an astrologer and she told me in a year and a half, my marriage of like 20 years would end.
Oh no.
And I'm like, is there anything, any indicators of that? And she's like, no, we're soulmates. We're so happy. And
Yeah.
you can like really plant a seed. And I just feel like,
Yeah, no. That's tough. I could see what maybe the astrologer's looking at, because 21 years that they've been married, that's the Saturn Square.
yeah,
But that Saturn Square is mainly about the perceptions of the world on us. It's usually around that time that maybe, and I'm making this up as I go along, so I'm being cheeky here, because I haven't really thought about it this way. But maybe the third Saturn phase of couples is when it comes out where they can no longer deal with the fact that one is Democrat and one's Republican. And so maybe that's when that comes out, that flare of, one is more yin and the other is more yang, that kind of thing. And again, I'm just breaking this down as I go along with it. I'm making this up as I go along. It sounds cool.
yeah,
Because here's the thing, like, we all individually go through, Saturn points that in some psychological world, they talk about 7-year cycles. Okay. So Saturn makes an astronomical occurrence to everybody's chart every 7 or 8 years. Okay. So when you're born with a particular Saturn, and your Saturn is in Scorpio at 0 degrees. And so when you were 7 or 8 years old, it was making a 90-degree aspect, making a square back to you. And then around 14, it was making the opposition, 14, 15. And around 21, 22, there's that square again, but on the opposite side. And then around 29 and a half years old, it makes a complete cycle. And so when we get to Saturn return with any element, whether it's individual, whether it's a business you've been in, or working in a career, or in a relationship, it's basically like this: 3/4, if we're looking at it individually, 3/4 of yourself belong to family, which is a element of karma that comes up around 7 or 8. Our peers, which is an element of karma around 14 or 15. You know how desperate teenagers are to hang out with their friends? Do you remember that yourself? I mean, I see it. I saw it with my own son, where their eyes get like fire breathing. I can't hang out with my friends. Oh. And so that's 14 or 15. And then around 21, 22, then we're all thinking about, a lot of us are getting out of college or whatever. And so there's the sense of, what I'm going to do with my life. And so we start listening to society, and I remember around that time, that's when I got on the computers. I didn't know what else to do. I was good at computers,
Yeah.
And then around 28, you start feeling the effects of the Saturn return, and it hits around 29 and a half. And so 3/4 of you belong to other entities: family, peers, society. And so 1/4 belongs to you when it gets to the Saturn return for the individual. And so that's when things start shedding their skin, so to speak. And so
Fascinating.
more of us. And so what I believe is that the first 30 years of life is about ego identification and how the world sees us. And then the next 30 years of life is about spiritual identification and how we see ourselves. And so we get to 35, 36, 37 years old. We start healing the effects of that 7, 8-year-old square, and then so forth and so on. So we get to repeat the patterns in a more adult kind of way. And then we get to our early 40s. And then along with the Saturn opposition, with the Uranus opposition that happens around that time, and we go through our midlife crisis. And that's when that jerk off guy goes out and gets rid of his beautiful wife who's tired of, and goes and buys the Corvette, and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, there's a lot of elements around that. But yeah,
it's interesting how that actually relates to like planetary aspects and transits.
It totally does.
I've never heard, quite that interpretation. And it's yeah.
It totally does.
So interesting. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. This has been such a great conversation. Brad, can you share where people can go to learn more about you, to book a reading, all of the things?
So my website, bradwilliamsastrology.com. It has all the information on there along with my schedule. You can also follow me, please, on Brad Williams Astrology on Instagram. I don't really mess with much other social media, so just that one.
Awesome. And you have a podcast as well, right?
Which I'm slacking on. You know what? Maybe Emily, we'll use your Karmic Story for the next one.
Oh, that'd be awesome. I'd love that.
But it's called the Karmic Story Podcast. There are 2 episodes that have been released so far. And if you want to hear a Karmic story given by me, then you can totally listen to those. And I'm only releasing the Karmic Story portion. I'm not releasing the whole reading, because the whole reading can be very sensitive and all that kind of stuff. So we just, the first 25 minutes or so of the reading is the Karmic Story, and that's that.
Awesome. I love it. And I definitely recommend to go listen to that. I've listened to those episodes before, and the karmic stories that you share are just so, so powerful. So, Brad, I just want to thank you and honor you for your brilliance and the gifts that you're sharing and your heart.
Well, Emily, I'm just going to say, stop projecting.
Okay, fellow Virgo. Okay.
Thank you for the kind words.
Yeah.
Takes one to know one. So thank you so much, Emily. And I look forward to connecting again in the future, and many blessings to you.